Hello, and thank you for watching this very special roundtable discussion. Pleased to be chairing this on behalf of Candezent Advisory. My name is Ian McGarrigle. I'm chairman of the World Retail Congress, and really looking forward to this, what I think will be hugely important and relevant discussion, looking at what is, or asking the question, what is the future for physical retail? At Candezent Advisory, one of the key goals is to really help contribute to the thinking, to the key issues that are shaping retail globally. And I think the last 12 months that we've experienced, and in fact still experiencing, retail probably has never before undergone such profound changes that it is currently experiencing and witnessing, and the impacts that we've been witnessing through the COVID-19 pandemic on physical retail is truly profound, and we have lots to discuss because it's interesting. The day that we're recording this session is literally the first anniversary that Italy went into lockdown, which was the first European country to go into national lockdown. And as we well remember, like a domino effect right around the world, through Europe and beyond, the world locked down, and with huge consequences for all sorts of things. Obviously, it's a major health crisis first and foremost, but the impact on retail was immediate because, as we know, and in fact still experiencing, essential retail, food and health and well-being have been allowed to stay open, but non-essential retail, as it became to be known, the stores closed with immediate effect, and then with some reopenings and still closures, as we're experiencing throughout Europe and beyond. Hundreds of thousands of shops around the world still remain closed, with all that means for retail. And what we've seen collectively across retail as is now well known is this massive shift, for understandable reasons, to online shopping. And you speak to most retailers and they will say that they are now in a position where they hadn't expected to be for another 3 to even 5 years time, and that online is now in some cases taking something like 50% or even more of their total sales. Well, quite clearly, if stores are closed and online is growing exponentially, that is, of course, going to have a massive impact on the balance longer term between on and offline. And the numbers are pretty stark. In 2020, the US saw something close to 13,000 shops closing, and in the UK, that number was closer to 20,000. And again, that picture is replicated around the world. And in the US, some research that I've seen is predicting and forecasting that something like 25% of malls in the US could close. And that, of course, is going to fundamentally change the whole picture. So quite clearly, lots and lots to talk about in probably a very short period of time. And to help lead us through some of those key questions, I'm delighted to introduce a panel from Candezent Advisory, which I think in itself reflects the range and the depth of experience within the wider Candezent Advisory. So to start us off, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Firstly, Gwen Morrison, who's partner of Candezent Advisory and former head of WPP's The Store Retail Research Unit. And Gwen is based in the US. Hi, Gwen. Professor Jonathan Reynolds, Associate Dean at Said Business School at the University of Oxford and Candezent partner. Hi, Jonathan. Terry Greenwood, also a partner of Candezent Advisory and former senior executive with Dixons and Tesco. Hi, Terry. And Alan Treadgold, founding partner of Candezent Advisory and former head of retail in several advertising and management consulting firms globally. And we're especially pleased to be joined also by Andrew Lever, who is CEO of BlueSquare, the UK's leading retail marketing agency, which includes Samsung and HP amongst its clients. So hi, Andrew, and hi to you all. So sort of building on my introduction there, quite clearly, that all the headlines talk about the impacts on physical space within retail, whether it's city centres, town centres, or shopping malls. And really, we've seen so many large retailers announce closure programs or exiting from some of those premium spaces. But maybe if I can turn to you first, Jonathan, what's your view 12 months on, 12 months in, maybe is the right way to put it, of this pandemic? How much further do you think we have to run with this? Is this still almost at the beginning of the story we're seeing unfold about sort of what's happening with physical retail?
Well, I think it's been a torrid few months for many retailers, most retailers, and I think unfortunately for those colleagues working in stores particularly, it has a bit further to run. I think this will vary by geographies. It'll vary by the different geographic impact of the pandemic, different attitudes towards shopping in different geographies, and the extended timing of state support that's available to support existing firms. So what I think we're likely to see is when non-essential retail reopens, as it is starting to do in many geographies, we'll see a bit of a bounce back. We'll see, as you say, those shoppers who have been desperate to get out and physically be in a store. What we won't know, of course, though, is how durable that kind of impact will be. Is that bounce back just going to be a temporary feature? And the challenge will be to assess the medium-term impact, I think, of trading, of shoppers' decisions. Where will we live? Where will we work? And therefore shop is up for grabs to some extent over the coming months. And there's a lot of kind of scenario planning around that, I think. And one of the ideas that I've been talking about is this notion of a de-densification of demand, that actually we end up with demand being more evenly spread, which makes it much harder to justify lots and lots of physical retail because it can't trade viably. Of course, this will vary also by sector. If you think about the UK, then as you said, Ian, a lot of stores closed in the last year, 27,000 job losses just this year alone so far, and 178 or 180,000 in 2020. More to go, I think. Someone like John Lewis here in the UK about to announce some more store closures, probably 6 or 8 store closures to come in the next couple of weeks. And their expectation is that 60% of their business will be online within the next couple of years. But so we'll see some further chain closures. We'll see some more acquisitions. Forest Fire, though, I think has got rid of a lot of the zombie firms that kind of came into the pandemic in poor shape. There's a few more to go, I think. There's a few more with some existential problems that will disappear. And we're still seeing some being bought up just for their brand equity and for some of their inventory. But of course, the good news out of this is actually it creates opportunities. As the cost of doing business in physical places starts to fall, it opens up new chances for new and innovative entrants into the marketplace, I think.
Actually, come back on that, Jonathan. I mean, so many people talk about what we've seen in the last 12 months is an acceleration of change of whatever trend, and certainly looking at physical retail before the pandemic, the big talk was about the oversupply of retail space. UK is one of the worst examples, if that's the right way to describe it. Are you surprised about what you have witnessed? Should we actually put it in that context of it's really what was happening and maybe even needed to happen?
There were some things that needed to happen, I think. That notion of the zombie firm, the firm that had been stripped back by its owners, perhaps the firm that had not invested strategically in new channels to market, new geographies, and so on. We're always going to be the first casualties in this kind of process, where the resilience of the firm was up for grabs in the first few months of the pandemic. And we've seen a lot of those firms go. But even those firms, the deepest pockets, have had difficulty. Like Tesco, for example, I think was quoting an £800 million hit in the full year at one point, and that was before any kinds of rate relief they were going to have. So there are some substantial amounts of money at risk in this whole process. I think some of this is, as you say, is acceleration. I think just using the acceleration metaphor is a bit too simplistic. I think we have to say that some things are speeded up, some things have slowed down, and some things have become more complicated. So as ever, I don't think it's always the acceleration argument that wins out. But certainly, as far as the move online is concerned, that's certainly been an acceleration. But of course, that's also created its own challenges in terms of the ability of existing firms' infrastructure to scale, and notably in the food retail sector.
Gwen, if I can bring you in here just to get a view from the US in terms of, I mean, some of those numbers I was quoting about store closures and predictions of something like 25% of mall space closing. What's you know, same question to Jonathan. Is there still further to run in terms of what's happening on that story in the US?
Absolutely. I mean, and we've been, for the last 5 to 10 years, even talking about the U.S. being overstored. So we were, showing examples of the zombie malls, and there were a lot of properties that were in distress as these traditional anchor tenants and these formats just were not working anymore with more interesting lifestyle retailers and experiential types of mall experience places where we integrated more entertainment and dining and so forth. And so that's the type of format that we'll see more and more of. But the problem is the current mall spaces are just too large to make those places work. I'm looking at more broadly, because of the online shopping, the adoption was certainly accelerated across many more age groups and many more categories of retail during the pandemic. And then we see much more comfort in fulfillment or replenishment shopping from home, many more of these types of interesting subscription types of models that are bringing, really delighting consumers in different ways, whether it's from vitamins to socks that you get in a box, some very interesting new players that are starting with a subscription. So you take fulfillment and some of these subscription pieces out, and you start saying, well, then what's the role of the store? You don't have to go to the store to get things. So what's the role of the store? And as we start to play that out, we look at much more intersection of media and retail. And we look at also experiences in the home that are fueled by technology. Simple things like labels that come to life with, a Shazam or an augmented reality. So bringing branded content into the home is forcing us to now look at these experiences across the continuum. And when you look at retail as being more experiential and less about simply fulfillment, and even retail as service, as Nordstrom started to play in that sandbox, quite interestingly, the capabilities that the retailers have don't align with the future of retail. So, and that's part of, I guess, our ongoing problem with being overstored. Retailers know how to build stores. Developers know how to develop, and so now we're putting pressure on the entire community, the investment side, through the operations, through the envisioning the store of the future from a concept. Is that we have to break out from the capabilities that we have to be able to operate very differently in this future environment.
Yeah. Thanks, Gwen. Alan, if I can turn to you. Obviously, we've seen a split between essential and non-essential retail in terms of what's happened, but there's many stories within that in terms of what sectors have been doing better than others. I mean, what's your sense about looking at physical retail? Is it a different story across different sectors? What sort of picture are you seeing?
Yeah, I think it is, Ian. It's interesting to hear Gwen's comment, first of all, about this sort of paradoxical world that we're finding ourselves in now, where retailers aren't necessarily best placed to be retailers, sort of strangely enough, because the skills that are needed are rather different to the traditional skills that retailers have tended to emphasize: opening stores, operating stores, and so on. But to your question, I think it is a tremendously mixed picture, which I think is why it's useful to try to drill beyond the headlines of so many store closures, a mass migration into online, because I don't think that that's the full story by any means. And I think the UK and the US are not alone in seeing the effects of the acceleration of change as a consequence of the pandemic and lockdowns being very unevenly spread across retail. I think some sectors have clearly suffered more than most in discretionary spend categories, and department stores within that. Life looks very problematic for a lot of department store retailers around the globe that are clearly saying in this new world they have too many stores. In grocery retail, I think a similar narrative in terms of large store space. And to Jonathan's earlier point, I think that's an acceleration of pre-existing trends, that those very large stores predicated on an infrequent large shop just really don't seem particularly well aligned to how consumers are shopping now and how they're going to want to shop in the future. But on the flip side, I think a lot more energy being expended on smaller, more locationally convenient stores. And of course, one of the headline acts in the UK last week was Amazon bringing fresh format into the UK. Okay, it's taken a while, it's only one store, but there's a lot of space available for that format. And surely there's something very timely about the technology in that store that makes shopping truly much more frictionless. I think that does seem to take the convenience format a little bit further in that category. But where I think, in a sense, the sort of real battleground lies between physical and digital is in those more experiential retail formats. You know, what about clothing? What about consumer electronics? And I think that one of the realities that we're operating in those worlds is that those physical stores are only relevant if they're performing more than a purely transactional function, which I can do online, which I may be more motivated to do online because of fears of personal safety. And I think that it's interesting over the last 12 months, and maybe particularly over the last 6 months, to see consumers starting to say that there's a base requirement for me in those categories as they start to reopen. The stores must feel safe to me. But more than that, the stores also must be interesting for me, or experiential, or deliver me more than purely the online experience can. Otherwise, I just don't have any reason to go into those stores. My other observation is that I suspect that, again, beyond the headlines, not only are we seeing a lot of store closures at the headline level, but I think we're seeing a lot of retailers saying the stores that I've got left are probably too large for the requirements that I have for those stores. And I think, interestingly, we may well see more sort of hybrid models emerging more rapidly than they otherwise would have done, where my store is sort of part warehouse and then another smaller part of the store is physically open to the shopper.
Yeah. So I was just going to come back. You mentioned Amazon Go. It's interesting. I saw a review in one of the papers at the weekend calling it "Welcome to Corporate Retail," and what it meant was it was really sterile, all about the technology, and famously there's very few or if any employees in the store. So it's, I think, as you were saying, Alan, there's got to be that balance, hasn't there, between what a store, you know, it's got to attract you for a range of reasons, and you know, some people will love that, I guess, and others won't.
Yeah, I think that's right. And of course, again, the flip side of just that thought is that during the pandemic and the subsequent lockdown, some of the big winners, it said, have been locally convenient stores, because we can't travel outside our local areas. We're very much encouraged not to. And the sort of return to local and the return to community has been one of the defining themes of reshaping shopping behavior. And of course, the other thing that Amazon Fresh and that whole model does is, I think, that it adds to the debate about the amount of scrutiny that shoppers are prepared to accept in their stores, cameras everywhere, of course, monitoring activity, in return for the promise of a more frictionless in and out experience. And I think if the Fresh format does nothing else, if it encourages more debate around levels of scrutiny for the shopper, that alone would be a good thing.